I was staying over at my friend's house for the night. We're both 21, and on the day of his 21st birthday, I stayed over and slept in the spare room downstairs. The house is newly built and very modern, so I don't think there's any chance of old hauntings, etc., being possible. Anyways, the night I slept in that room, I fell asleep like a baby, around 11 p.m. I had a dream of a really old house I'd never seen in my life. One story, concrete path to the doorstep, and no garage. I remember in the dream approaching the house slowly and peering into the window on the right of the house, leading into a window. There was an empty bedroom except for a bed and an old Caucasian lady lying on it silently. She rolled over and looked at me, and the dream ended abruptly, as I was woken in cold sweat by what sounded like the groaning of an old man. I looked around, and nothing. Checked under the bed and closet, and nothing. Checked my phone, and it was 6 a.m. I'm an extremely heavy sleeper, and barely wake up to alarms I set for myself for work. And since it was a weekend, I tend to wake up very late. What was even more weird was that due to having night terrors as a kid, I was almost convinced it was responsible for me never dreaming. After that, though, this dream was extremely vivid. I told my friend's mum about this later that day, and she mentioned something along the lines of, "That's strange. Next time sleep in the upstairs room, because I forgot to salt that room." The mum is quite religious, though. I couldn't tell you what religion. There's statues on the table upstairs with posters in another language I can't recognise, and she seems to be quite interested in the paranormal, saying she has visions of my other friends, some sinking in water and other symbolic things, mentioning that her son strictly doesn't want me to tell him about this experience, and didn't elaborate. Any ideas? If it helps, I'm Filipino, and don't partake in anything religious or paranormal myself. I've also never seen that woman in my dream before, and the groan. Though my friend has a dog, he has to stay in the backyard to sleep, meaning there's no way a dog can impersonate the groan of an old man in my ear, run out the room and close the door behind him, so I've got no idea. On the day, it was just my friend sleeping in his room upstairs, and the mom sleeping in the parents' bedroom upstairs as well. And they're basically second family, so I don't think they play a prank on me. I've never experienced anything like this.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
There's a place in Nova Scotia known locally as a little girl's grave. It's a gravestone of a young girl named Catherine McIntosh. She died of an illness and was originally buried in McLennan Cemetery. However, due to a dispute with a neighbour, her body was dug up and moved to the side of Greenville Road in front of the family farm. One night, I went with two friends to visit the gravestone. It was a dark and gloomy night. Driving down the eerie winding dirt road until we came upon the location. We brought a toy to leave at the gravestone. The local law surrounding the site says to leave a toy for her and to never take a toy away. It wasn't until we left and began driving down the dirt road that we had a paranormal experience. We noticed on the front windshield and the condensation a small child's footprint on the glass. It was so detailed and human-like. It scared us quite a bit, to say the least. One of the friends I had visited the gravesite with, we worked at the same restaurant at the time. A few days after we had visited the site, we were working together and we both heard something truly bizarre. It was the sound of a child laughing, very faintly. We both stared at each other in disbelief. We had no idea where the sound originated from whatsoever, as there was no one around except the two of us. Not long after this, we had a falling out, and haven't spoken with each other since 2013. This is one of the only paranormal experiences that I've encountered in my life. If anyone who reads this has had any similar experiences at this gravestone, please share it with this community.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
I think I know what happened, but there are some things I can't explain that well. I have several vivid early memories, up to age 6, of me and my current life. They track exactly what my family remembers, and with pictures and timelines, etc. Around the age of 5, I began having terrifying nightmares that I couldn't wake up from, and didn't know weren't real. I would go days thinking that my nightmares were real. I still have nightmares and night terrors like this, where I wake up screaming, with scratches, bruises, and feeling deeply disturbed. When I was 6, my 2 best friends moved away, and that's my last real memory before I fell asleep and woke up when I was 10. The alternate life and reality in very similar ways, but there are enough differences and scattered memories that it noticeably doesn't match up. I remember things that reportedly never happened to me and have no recollection of things that did. For example, I remember a situation where I watched the neighbour's kids for 30 minutes when I was 8. When I woke up and 4 years had passed, the kids were the same age, and I didn't babysit them for the first time for 30 minutes until I was 11. When I was 11, I knew exactly what was going to happen during those 30 minutes, because I knew already. It was like what I had previously experienced came true 3 years later. I've kept journals since I could write, and I remember writing, yesterday it was 2005, now it's 2006, and about my New Year's Eve. What I remember happening was going to the plains and watching fireworks. I did write the first sentence, but in the physical diary I didn't say what we did. When I asked my mom, it turned out we were in our neighbourhood that year. We have pictures of my sister and me at 2 kids' exhibits at Niagara Falls on the same day. I remember one, which was a glass factory. We have pictures of another, which I think was a science factory. I remember the outfit because I thought it was really pretty, but not the event. It doesn't even seem familiar when I look at the pictures. Like the kid in them is me, but it wasn't how I remember myself during those years. It's just a little off. I know it's normal for kids to forget things, but 15 years later, I still don't recognise myself or anything in it. It was like I fell asleep, lived for 4 years, went back to sleep during those 4 years, and woke up in another alternate life. It really shook me up, and felt like I was seeing the world in a different filter. Colours were slightly different, people looked a bit different, I felt shorter than in my dream, and I felt emotions differently. They were much, much stronger. My personality changed completely. I became more withdrawn, aloof, and depressed. I had panic attacks all the time and would get overstimulated by seemingly small things. I've been that way ever since. Weirdly enough, my mom says the same thing. Around the time I was 10, my personality changed a lot. Personalities and a sense of identity don't really develop until around that age, so it's entirely possible my personality was mainly a mix of what I saw and what I imagined, and that's why I was so different after those 4 years. As an adult, I've been diagnosed with several mental illnesses, including bipolar with psychosis and borderline personality disorder, both of which can feature symptoms of dissociation, depersonalization, and derealization. I do not have a dissociative disorder, so I'm pretty sure all of this was the beginning of the psychosis and disassociation related to the other disorders that I would experience for the majority of my life. That really doesn't make it any less weird.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
So basically, it was me, my mother, and my father. And for some odd reason, I decided to ask them if I could go into the mall for a bit, just to check if they had certain stuff that I was wanting. And as I leave the store, to my right is a food court, and to my left there's a whole line of chain stores and such. As I'm walking past these stores, just glancing at them, not really paying any attention to what's in front of me, this girl out of nowhere says, "Hey, stop, I want to talk to you. I have a message for you." So of course, I stop dead in my tracks. And I'm all in my head like, is she talking to me or someone else? And she goes, "No, I want to talk to you," with this weird gesture. So at this point, I'm freaked out. Why is she wanting to talk to me? Like, what the fuck? And before I know it, she's asking me about school and asking how my life is and some other questions I don't really remember. She then, in the middle of our conversation, takes her hand and puts it up about halfway and spreads her fingers in a way that says, "Let's interlock our fingers and have our palms touching." I don't know how else to describe it, but when our hands touched, it felt like there was so much good and loving energy that I just needed in that time. At the same time, I was struggling with my faith, and as we were holding hands, I literally swear to God I fucking came in my pants. Not a lot, but just enough to kind of notice. Appearance-wise, she had red hair, a white tank top with spaghetti straps, black jeans and black shoes. I believe wears some generic sneakers like Vans or Converse. At the end of our conversation, before she left, she was telling me how much she loved me, and that she was proud of me and how far I've come. I honestly don't even know what she was. I've been told that she may have been an angel or something else. She also had bodyguards around her. It was more in the shape of a crescent moon kind of thing, and they were all dressed in black clothes. Very formal, but also kind of minimalist, so to speak. I also have the idea that she could be dualistic, or the yin and yang of all that exists. I don't know, just my thoughts. Also, this happened 3 years ago. I'm 20 now, about to be 21, and I was 16 when it happened. I still think about her on the daily, 24/7. She had a very mom or mother kind of vibe to her. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on who or what she could be. Please, I'm begging for you to tell me.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
I'm going to try and explain this as best as I can remember. This happened when I was in high school, probably around 16 or 17, and I'm now 27. So please forgive me if I can't recall every detail. At the time, I had a girlfriend. There's a hip little neighbourhood in our city called Kensington that we would always meet up at to spend time together. She lived far north in the city, and I was pretty far south. Kensington was right around the middle, and a nice place to hang out. We were walking away from the train platform, almost a full block away, when a man in a suit came running at us with a panicked look on her face. Frantically, he says, "Can you help me? My wife just went into labour and I was supposed to meet my sisters at Starbucks in a couple of minutes, but I need to run to the hospital. Can you please bring her this bag?" And holds out a plastic shopping bag. My girlfriend kind of nudges my arm, obviously thinking this is a little sketchy. But I say, "Yeah, for sure." He tells me her name. We'll say Sarah. Thanks me and runs straight to the train platform. When I realise that the bag is strangely light, I tell her, and she suggests we look inside. I'm conflicted by this, but concede that it's reasonable seeing how odd this whole situation was. When we look in the bag, all that is there is a couple of crumpled up receipts and another crumpled up bag. We open the second bag, and there's nothing inside. We're freaked out, considering just turning around and not going into the Starbucks, but my curiosity has gotten the best of me at this point. We walk the remaining block or two, and as I walk into the Starbucks, I call out, "Sarah?" A woman stands up, yells very emphatically, "Thank you so much. I have to go to the hospital now to be there for the birth, but I appreciate this so much, blah, blah, blah." She throws out her arms around me in a huge hug, and then runs out the door. And that's it. I looked up social experiments, TV shows, and every couple of years I remember and Google to see if anyone has experienced anything similar. But nothing. Never have had a reasonable suggestion that makes sense to me. And it's just something that bothers me when I think about it. These weren't university-aged people. These were adults in their late 30s or 40s at least. So I don't think it was a school project or anything. Any idea what this could have been for? What was the purpose of the whole interaction?
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
This new year, I wanted to do something special with my boyfriend, so we decided to go away for the night to a fancy resort in the middle of the desert. The whole day was absolutely lovely. We relaxed by the pool, saw some native wildlife, had great food, etc. By nightfall, we were quite tired from being out in the sun all day, so decided to have a super chill night in, watching movies and just pigging out. At around 11 PM, we heard a party starting up over the sand dunes. We didn't think anything of it. It was New Year's, right? People are out partying. The music was loud, and we could hear people yelling and laughing, and generally sounding like they were having a great time. By the time our movie marathon ended, it was around 3 AM, and we were exhausted. The party was still going strong. Good for them. But it continued loud and strong up until around 5:30 AM. A bit annoying, but nothing weird. But that was until it was time for us to check out. I made a comment to the receptionist, something along the lines of, "Sounded like it was a crazy party last night. It lasted all night long. Damn loud too." To which she responds that the party at the main hall was great, but they made sure it only stayed open until around 2 AM. Weird. So thinking out loud, I say that maybe people decided to camp out close to the resort and throw a party, To which she says that was impossible, as the resort owns around 500 hectares, including the land around the resort, so it wouldn't be possible for anyone to camp anywhere close to us. Wait, what? We definitely heard a loud-ass party next to us. Freaked out, and dead set on finding a rational explanation for this, we went to check out the area where we thought the party was coming from, but there was nothing there. No signs of a party, no signs of anything. Just a vast and empty desert. Now we're freaked out and just ready to get the hell out of there, but I couldn't let it go. So later on I started Googling keywords and found something about how jinns live in the desert, and that they're known to congregate around or in proximity to people having parties and drinking. So is this a group of jinns just having a good time? Or am I looking too deep into it?
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
I'll start off by saying that these all happened in and around my home. My house was built in 1928, which was a house that was originally there from a town that was flooded to create a man-made reservoir. So it's very densely forested and secluded. The previous owner apparently died of a heart attack in the home and left all his belongings in the home before I moved in and such. So I'll get to the first encounter I had when I was 14 years old. I was laying in my bedroom at around 2 AM, and it was basically in a nook in the corner of my room, so I could only see outside into my hallway, and the stairs were hidden from view. I have an older sister that would usually get home late. So randomly, the lights turn on in the hallway, and I hear as someone was slowly walking up my stairs, and then got very hard and fast, like someone was running, and it immediately stopped. I said hello, and mind you, could only see the hallway, and I was just frozen because there was no one. I immediately called my home phone and woke up my parents because I thought someone was in the house. Never found out. The second story was similar, but occurred outside the house. This is just a very eerie thing that happened to me. So as I said earlier, I live in the woods and it gets very quiet at night. So I'm on my computer and I had my window cracked and I randomly heard something loud outside. So I stick my head out of the window and keep listening. It's about 5 minutes and I hear a grown man screaming "help" very frantically. I know one could say it was an animal, but I've lived here for my whole life and have hunted and heard animals. I got automatically frightened and was contemplating calling the police. I waited another 5 minutes and I heard it again, but now this time it seemed further away and more frightened. So I called 911 and they never found anything.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
The house I was raised in was a renovated carriage house. Sometime around 1860, it was converted to a home. I know this because in remodelling our living room in the late 60s, we found the original 12x1 boards of the carriage house covered by strips of newspaper dated 1860. The headline read, "War has begun." Over the newspaper strips were many different wallpapers. Then came some lath and plaster with more wallpaper over it. My father's mother and father purchased the house in 1912. From the little bit of research I did when I was a teen, I believe the house was first purchased by a family whose mother never left. I never had any information from my grandparents about any hauntings, but my mother told me that she would sit up late at night and hear walking in the upstairs front bedroom. Sometimes the walking would go out into the upstairs hallway, and sometimes down the stairs. We had a couple of little dogs who would suddenly get up, go to the bottom of the stairs and start barking. Slowly, they would back up from the stairs to finally ending up staring at the back wall of the living room. My part is as a young child, approximately aged 4 up to age 18, I would smell what my mom called a posy. She said it was what ladies of pre- and post-Civil War days would wear. It would fill my room, and I would know the lady was there. The lady would sit in my bedroom and rub my forehead gently and brush her fingers across my cheek, as if she were brushing my hair away from my face. I was never ever afraid of Mary at no time. After I married, my husband and I came home for a few months, staying in our basement rec room. One night, I went to bed early because I didn't feel well. My husband and mother were upstairs watching TV. Suddenly, they heard a loud crashing sound in the basement. my husband came downstairs to see if I had dropped something. I was totally in dreamland and heard nothing. The only thing that could have made the noise was a pipe that had been leaned up in a corner, but in such a way that it couldn't have fallen by itself. We believe it was Mary coming to check on me. Her full skirt must have brushed the pipe and made it fall.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
3 months ago, I went on vacation to Italy with my spouse and some friends. We were in a rather old and gloomy house. When it came time to divide up the rooms, one of our friends, who claims to be a psychic, refused to take a particular room because of bad vibes. I didn't care, so we took it. After the third night, I was suddenly awakened. Something was tugging at my foot 2 times in a row. I wasn't afraid, but I was surprised. It felt a bit like a child playing or wanting to ask something. I told myself that I was dreaming, but the following night, I felt as if someone was resting gently on my legs. When I opened my eyes to see what was going on, I saw a little boy standing at the end of the bed. I was really scared, even though I didn't feel anything evil. I explained the whole thing to my psychic friend, who wanted to help me. She detected several spirits. According to her, the little boy even grabbed her arm, pulled her hair, and then went to another room. He just wanted to play. Nothing has happened since. Recently, however, strange things have been happening. I wake up several times for no reason at night, with the feeling that something is wrong. Once again, I was awakened with the sensation that my foot was being pulled, and this is where it gets creepy. A week ago, my spouse was getting ready to leave in the morning. Half asleep, I felt a warm hug enveloping me, and I was happy that he was giving me a hug before leaving for work. Except that at the same time, I hear my spouse in the other room leaving and locking the door. Who the hell was hugging me? I was terrified, so I turned on the lamp and left the room. Calmed down, I wanted to go back to the room to turn off the lamp. It was already off, but I remembered clearly that I turned it on. Here's the story. I'm lost. I have so many questions. Is it possible that this ghost boy followed me? Why show up 3 months later? Is he trying to tell me something? How do I know what he wants or help him?
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
Just want to say that nothing unusual got caught on camera. However, some things did happen, and I'm looking for some opinions. We started to go step by step through the ground floor, and whatever remained on the first floor. This time, we used a separate phone to make sound recording. There were a few strange things that happened at the time, and a few that we had found at home. The most weird thing is that we heard a gunshot when we were on the first floor. Just to mention, the location is quite secluded, without too many people in vicinity, and most of them don't have guns. After wondering what happened and thinking something big had collapsed, we couldn't explain it in the end. And it was a very sharp bang followed by an echo, not common with something falling or crashing and squashing to the muddy floor. Also, as we got back down, there wasn't something new on the floor to have caused such a sound. Next strange thing was in the moment we entered the stairs into a cell block, both of us started to feel really weird. Not exactly fear or dread, but rather like a panic and weak state, or similar to low blood pressure. The second we left the cell block, it stopped. It felt like I was rejuvenating. The last thing we felt was a strange odour from the courtyard, like electrical motherboards or components. When we got home and started to go through the sound recordings, we noticed something really strange. We could hear some stuff we didn't say or hear, and the most creepy is that it sounded similar to our voice, not perfect, but close with a weird tone, different vocalization, and sounded like it was from a different position from us on the phone. First one was exactly before the gunshot. I don't know. After that, we could hear the gunshot and I say, I don't know what that was. The second time, we heard a small girl giggle when going downstairs and stopped to look at something. The third and last time I actually answered to something I asked, to the other person I was with. I asked if she wanted to go to some part of the prison, but she was scared pretty much already and nodded no with her head. She didn't say anything. On the recording, the voice whispered, "Not now," or "You can't." Not sure as one letter changes the whole thing. Literally, I heard it so clear, like it whispered directly into the phone, although she was 1 or 2 meters away. Even I didn't hear so well, and I was holding the phone. One last thing, but not certain it's paranormal. Maybe it was just us when we started sniffling that electrical odour smell. On the recording, we could still hear the sniffling as we were literally walking. Other things also can be heard like whispers. Not sure it was me. What is creepy about this is that all the voice phenomena sounded a lot like ours, mine and the girl I was with, like trying to mimic us and even mimic what we said before. I said, "I don't know," a few times when exploring the prison. My friend also laughed and giggled a few times on a joke I made in the courtyard. Just not sure what to say. Never thought something like this would happen. Went there to get photo evidence. The sound recording was just a hunch from me before going in. Anyway, I'm not going back there a third time. Mostly because the feeling I got entering the cell block, it felt like my body was struggling to cope.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
Just want to share my experience of living in a haunted house. I've been out for 1.5 years now, and I'm feeling a little less traumatized by it, and want to see what input others might have. So 5 years ago, a friend and our kids were in a pretty tough spot, and decided to move to a property that had 2 houses on it, so that we could help each other out and save a bit of money by sharing some utilities and expenses. I'll be honest, it was a very dingy property, in a terrible area. You could tell the property hadn't been cared for years. But we were determined to make it work by bringing our own positive vibes and a bit of TLC. From before we even moved into the property, things got weird. There was a certain spot in the lounge where you would see strange shadows when walking past from outside. Later, that spot would have cold spots. The dog would bark into the corner for no apparent reason. Mould grew on the walls randomly overnight, and no one ever felt comfortable sitting or hanging out there, no matter how things were laid out. The day we moved in, my son got stuck in the bathroom. We had to rip the whole handle off the door apart to get him out. There was no locking mechanism on the door, and we couldn't figure out how it happened. But the latch got jammed into the door frame, and there was no way to get it out without ripping the mechanism apart. Not long after, the same son also told me that the first night he heard the bedroom door open, and an old lady looked in on him and his brother. They both saw it. They were awake because it was a new house, and it was strange to them, and they thought I was coming in to say goodnight. I remember that I was too tired to check on them that first night, and they swore it didn't look like me. We pretty much straight away accepted that there was some presence there, and tried our best to just live with it. Moving out wasn't really an option. And right up until the end, a big part of me I thought I was just being superstitious. Weird stuff was always happening. I constantly had things just disappear. Even while I was using them, I would never find them again. I thought maybe people were breaking in and taking things, because it happened so often. But there was always someone home, and the houses weren't very big, so we would have noticed. There were also much more valuable things, like small electronics that never went missing. At night, I would hear things shuffling around the house and kitchen cupboard doors opening and closing. When I went out to see if any of the kids were up, I'd find that everyone was fast asleep. I had to pass their rooms in the hall to get to the kitchen, so I would have seen them dashing off to bed because they heard me get up. Eventually, it got to the point where I heard things shuffling around my room all night. Sort of like feet shuffling or animals crawling on carpet. I never really got used to it. I just felt it because I had to sleep for some time. And no, it wasn't vermin. I was very particular about my sleeping area, and there were no signs of any animals anywhere in the house. Once, I felt a tap on my shoulder while I was half asleep. I assumed I was dreaming, or one of the kids wanted me. I rolled over to look, and nothing. Then, I felt the tapping on my shoulder again, harder this time, and absolutely no one there to do it. I was so terrified, I closed my eyes tight and laid awake with my eyes closed until the sun came up, and it felt safe to open them. I would often hear my kids call out "Mum" distinctly in their voice. And when I went to see what they wanted, they said it wasn't them. I often heard it when I was on the toilet, again and again, and would call out in frustration to wait a minute. I was certain they were joking with me at first and brushed it off, but I got more and more insistent that they tell me if they were calling for me and to stop it. But one of my sons got very upset and said they hadn't. He was angry that I didn't believe him, and a little scared because it was happening so often. Pictures would just fly off the wall. Not fall, fly across the room. We'd find them a metre or two away from where they'd fell down. And it didn't matter if it was a nail or any type of adhesive holding them. They'd all just keep falling down. Often, we'd be sitting in the room and see or hear them fall down. So now it wasn't my kids accidentally knocking them off. I eventually stopped bothering to put them up and just put them on shelves or kept them in a cupboard when they kept falling off the shelves as well. Once my housemate and I were cooking dinner and joking around in the kitchen, when the TV in the lounge turned on to horse races at full volume. We were the only ones home at the time. I didn't have any sports channels tuned and only really used my TV for Netflix and gaming, so I have no idea how we even got to that channel. The volume was also way louder than we'd ever have it. I assumed the dog had sat on the remote, so we looked for the remote, looked everywhere. It wasn't until a while later that we found it in a remote sleeve on the side of the couch that I never used. It couldn't have been the dog. We joked about the unliving residents wanting to watch the races. Once, I had a terrifying sleep paralysis experience in the room where my shoulder was tapped. At first I thought I had woken up from a nice nap, and I could sense someone walking around the bed, but couldn't see them. That's when I realised that I couldn't move, and heard growling. Something was tapping on my legs and grabbing my toes, and whatever it was, it felt like it was sucking the energy out of me from my feet. I screamed for what felt like half an hour before my screams were loud enough for my housemate in the next room to hear and come in to wake me up. I was really shaken up after that. Things got really bad in the year that we left. One of the rooms was absolutely freezing all of the time, even with a heater on. You had frosted breath. And this was in a subtropical climate where winters barely get cold enough for a jumper. One night, I woke up and my bedroom was filled with light, and I saw people or things just pacing around my bed quite quickly. I always slept in total darkness. This wasn't a dream or sleep paralysis. I saw this. I closed my eyes really tight and hoped it would be gone when I opened them. It was quite some time before I could open them again, but when I did, it was gone. I brought everyone obsidian protection stones to wear. One morning, the one that my housemate was wearing shattered as he put it on for no apparent reason. He'd had it for a year by that point with no issues. We also found it really difficult to get out of the house. We decided to leave in December and couldn't actually get out until the following August. That's a whole story on its own, but we felt like the house just wouldn't let us go. There were several times over the years where we tried to go on holidays and something would happen to prevent it each and every time. We had 3 different cars break down on 3 different occasions, each time only days before going away. The last night we spent there, my housemate woke up with scratches on their back. They were all in a spot they couldn't reach, and as they were a chronic fingernail biter, they had no nails to scratch with anyway. Every scratch looked like it was from a set of 3 talons. No one else was in the room, not even the dog, and I checked the bed for anything that could have made the marks. This happened in a room that was ice cold. After that, we decided that none of us should spend the night in that house again. By this point, I had finally found a house, and we slept on mattresses on the floor in the new house till moving day. Everyone was too afraid to be at that house after dark. Even when we were cleaning and moving, we made sure we were long out of there before the sun started to go down. When I went back to move and clean, I would get a serious sense of panic as afternoon came on and felt like I needed to get out of there as soon as possible. After we had moved out, my teenage sons were still a bit sceptical, or just generally treating it like a bit of a joke. One night, they decided to drive out to the old house without telling me. This was before we had returned the keys to the agent. They went in and immediately creeped themselves out so much they decided to leave. But it was only after shutting the door they realised they had left their keys inside. The house was empty, and they were only there a few minutes. I don't even know why or where they would have put them down. Late at night, I had to drive out and bring the spare key. I couldn't bring myself to park on the property or even walk to the door. I asked one of my kids to run in and get the keys as quickly as he could. In the windows, I could feel 1,000 eyes just staring at me. It makes me shudder just thinking about it. It was after this that the kids all took it more seriously, because they felt it too, and they couldn't just make sense of the key situation or why they even wanted to go back there. They always hated that house. I see it as the house forcing us all to go back one last time. I still feel like if I'd gone in, I wouldn't have been able to get back out for some reason.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
Ever since I was young, I've seen a large black wolf with red eyes. The first encounter I had with it was when I was 12. I was walking home from school in the mid-afternoon and was mostly zoning out. I used to bring my portable CD player to and from school and listen to CDs on my hour-long trek back home, so I didn't notice him at first. I had to trek through a large suburban area in order to get to my house on the far side of it from the school. But as I'm walking, I start to feel uneasy. I begin to look around and spot this wolf who stood as tall as I did at the time. And the only reason this is so ingrained into me is because I remember looking eye to eye with him. I was coming up a hill, and about a block down on the corner of the road, he was just standing there, staring at me. My grandfather was a canine handler, so I have been raised with dogs my whole life. I immediately went into play it safe mode, like I would with a large unfamiliar dog, and averted my eyes because I didn't want it to think I was challenging it. My turn was thankfully on my left, and the wolf out on my right, so I steadied my pace, reminding myself not to run. Running triggers the hunting instinct, and while I was still trying to wrap my head around the absolutely massive size of this creature, I did my best to keep my eyes downwards. But at this point, I was turning up my cul-de-sac, trying to keep it in view. I keep the paws in my sight as I cut across the road up towards my house. That was when they disappeared. I looked back, knowing I shouldn't take my eyes off a stray animal, but he wasn't there. I kind of cursed myself mentally at the time. I think I was still in shock from the size, that I hadn't processed that it was just a massive wolf in broad daylight. I remember chiding myself as I hurried into my house and closed and locked the door behind me. I lived in that house for a year afterwards and would frequently see him sitting in my backyard or in the field behind my 6-foot privacy fence, running in the unkept space, or staring directly up at my second-story window. Then I moved from Colorado to Texas. I thought that would be the end of it, but I continued to see it. I was afraid at first of it, but over time grew used to catching sight of it. Most interactions were just catching him watching me. I never felt threatened, but he was always around. I've had multiple encounters where I wasn't the only one to see him either. I've had exes and my current spouse, then best friends saw him at 15 on their parents' almost 400 acres of property one night when we were having a sleepover. The next morning, we went out to roam the fields. We found a dead cow who had been torn apart, limbs scattered all over the pasture it was in. However, it wasn't supposed to even be there. There were no other cattle there. They were all over a mile away, behind 2 or 3 closed fences.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
In 2019, me and my wife went to camp in Sonadia. We faced something rather unusual. We decided to have a beach walk at night. The moon was bright. We were walking and enjoying the shorelines. At some time, my wife spotted a distant shadow hanging before us. So we felt curious and decided to get close to see what it was. As we were getting close to the shadow, we felt sick, both of us. Like we will be throwing up and the gravity becomes 2 times stronger. So my wife got scared, telling me to call it off. The moment we backstepped, the shape turned into a silhouette of a dog-like or horse-like animal, but huge. Almost a dino-sized canine shape, and started progressing towards us. Both of us had a clear image, and the scary part is, the pressure of this presence made us feel sick instantly. For that, we started running, and it started following us. Both of us ran for how long, we have no idea. It was instinctively. We stopped when we reached our camp. Our team decided to move at the earliest of the dawn, and the locals pressured us not to share this with anybody. Both of us don't drink or smoke. If there's any explanation of what we saw, please share.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
Is this a crazy thought? When I was younger, pretty much my entire childhood, I used to have sleep paralysis. I remember not being able to move and a dark shadow would appear in my room. It would get closer and closer, and it felt very real. I suffered with depression my entire childhood. I didn't really know what happiness felt like. I thought everyone just sort of felt that way. At a certain point in my late teens, I recognised I had a problem and started taking medication, and it helped a little bit, but nothing too significant. I was still having sleep paralysis at this point in my life too. I don't know if there was any correlation between my depression and my sleep paralysis, but I remember vividly in my mid-20s, I hit a breaking point in my life where I just wasn't happy and I knew full-heartedly I needed a change. I remember telling myself I will fight for some sense of peace in my life. I took a huge leap of faith and worked on rebuilding myself over the span of a year or so. At this point, I was still having sleep paralysis, and I remember it wasn't scaring me as much anymore, to the point where I wasn't afraid of it. Suddenly one day, almost as if I snapped my fingers, I felt this overwhelming sense of joy in my life. I felt so happy, I couldn't believe that feeling was real. After that, I had sleep paralysis one more time, but this time, it wasn't like any other time I've ever experienced it. This time, I wasn't afraid of it. I had this incredible feeling of anger. I remember being angry with it as it was approaching me. I was no longer afraid and let it scare me. I remember yelling at it, "Do it already! If you're here to take me away, then do it! Stop wasting my time! I'm not afraid of you!" I remember wanting to jump up and physically fight it, and I couldn't. I thought it was death coming for it, but I wasn't afraid. This was my very last time I've ever experienced sleep paralysis in my life, and it was also the time I found peace. I'm not sure if I scared my depression away or if those two things are related, but I've never been happier. I hope I don't sound stupid or crazy as any of you read this. I just wanted to share my experience. I'm now 30 years old and I can't even explain how humbled I feel in my life. I took a huge leap of faith after losing my job. I sold everything I owned and started my life over with nothing. I recognised I wasn't happy and fought to find meaning. I now own my own business doing something I love. I have absolutely amazing friends and family I'm surrounding myself with. I have the dream car I always wanted as a kid, and I'm on the right track to build my first tiny home soon.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
In December of 2021, my girlfriend and our son moved into an apartment in Aberdeen, Washington. In no way is she a non-believer of the paranormal, but she does get spooked at the idea of sharing a roof with a spirit. In the year of living in this apartment, we hadn't heard any knocking movement and or seen any shadow figures. Sometime after I started visiting her, we quickly found signs that we weren't alone. She would hear knocks or what sounded like something wandering around her in her home. Around the third or fourth time of me coming over, we hopped into the shower after a long day of adventuring. After rinsing off and stepping out to dry off, I looked up into our son's room, and peering out at me was a tall shadow figure with long arms and glowing red eyes. Within a blink of an eye, it disappeared. Panicked, I leaned into the shower and told my girlfriend what happened. Shocked and stunned, she responded, "Shut up, no way, you're joking, right?" After drying off and getting dressed, I inspected our son's room but couldn't find any sign of the apparition. After both of us calmed down and went to bed, we woke up the next morning talking about what we encountered. Fast forward to a couple more weeks later, we started moving our son to his own bed and plugged in our baby monitor, then climbed into our bed and cuddled up in pure darkness. As we were slowly drifting to sleep, we could hear our son start to cry. We were laying there, letting him cry a bit. Then suddenly, hitting us like a truck, a deep demonic voice came through the monitor. "Wake up!" Chills went up our spines and raced into his room and scooped him up and ran back to our bed. We finally moved her out of the apartment and closer to town. My first adventure with my girlfriend in a ghost town. As a sweet surprise, my girlfriend took me out to the Franklin ghost town. It was an old coal mining town back in the 1880s. In 1894, 37 coal miners suffocated due to a fire that was intentionally started. It's around a 2.5-mile hike, but the path splits in two. At the split, there's an old black minecart. The first path we took was straight, past the cart and into the residential area, where old foundations are rizzled with vine everywhere, along with beautiful scenery. We continued further down the path and thought we were walking onto private property, so we quickly turned around, walking back to the split path. It felt different, almost as if we were being watched from the old foundations. When we made it back to the other path, we heard some of the conversions from the other hikers as they were passing by talking about the cemetery. Continuing on the path, we made it to a big hole covered in old rail tracks and welded rebar, which is the same tunnel that the miners suffocated in. I desperately wanted to visit the cemetery, so my girlfriend and I continued down this narrow path. One look on our left side, and we could slide down the steep slope. We got about halfway there to our destination when my girlfriend pointed out this massive minecart track that goes through the woods. After a little while of thinking, we finally made it to the cemetery. It was beautiful. Some headstones had fallen over on their own due to time and the elements. Others had ivy and moss grown over, and every headstone had a gift left out for them. Old coins and toys for the little ones. I remember reading a headstone of a little one who passed when they just turned 1. The hike was gorgeous, and the sights and smells were capturing and will forever be engraved in my head. It definitely gave me spooky vibes, but I might have to return with a spirit box.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
So I live in the rural Midwest United States. I'm in the middle of nowhere in thick woods. It's a 20-minute drive to the nearest town, and my family owns about a good couple miles of woods around my house. The property my house is on was originally hunting land. My dad bought and cut trees down in and built our house on. The earliest one I can remember is faint, because I was young, like at least 8 or 9 years old. But I was outside at night just hanging around our back door, which had a bright light above it that illuminated a good 30 feet. I'm playing, doing 9-year-old things, and I heard what sounded like someone go psst in my ear and touch my back, and I immediately sprinted inside. Stuff like this happens all the time here. Now time for the unbelievable story. So I'm home alone a lot because my stepfather works out of state during the summer, and my mom is a freelance photographer and also goes to work with him because she can't be away from him for more than 3 seconds. This happened when I was around 12 years old. I was home alone for about 2 weeks. Not much happened until around Wednesday, the second week. It was like 12 a.m. and I was in the kitchen with 2 large windows facing a corner of my house, a pool, a large pond and a tree line. Anyway, I was standing in the kitchen in front of this window, was where our microwave was at the time. I was making something to eat when I looked up and saw something what looked to be someone running on all 4s. All around the pool, dip behind the corner of my house, then circle around the pond and stand up on 2 legs, and just stand in the tree line before sprinting into the woods. Safe to say, I hunkered down in my room without sleeping that night, and spent the rest of the week at a family member's house.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
So I love paranormal stuff. I try to find haunted places and explore. Anyway, some nights I get really bored and I'll go for walks at midnight, or just at night. One night, I'm talking to some friend about the school near me. I looked up online if anything happened there, because I was looking for somewhere possibly haunted to investigate. Years ago, there were murders on Halloween and some people died. I thought this would be a perfect place, and I got ready. When I got to the school, nothing was happening, so I started mocking, saying if there's any ghosts there, you must be chicken, because you aren't even trying to scare me. I started walking in the middle of the field and noticed the school lights were flickering. I heard running far from me, so I looked and saw someone running at me full speed across the field. They ran behind a crate close to me, and I went over and nobody was there. Nobody could have run away. I was watching the crate the entire time. At that point, I knew something wasn't right with what I said, so I went home. A couple of weeks go by, and my friend is trying to convince me to go back with him. I eventually cave, and one night we go, and I start to record. In the recording, you can hear someone walking from far. You can barely hear it, but it gets louder as they got closer. They got close enough to where me and my friends started to hear it, and I had to tell them to be quiet so I could listen. It's dead quiet, and we both hear someone step on gravel, but nobody was even near. We looked everywhere that could make the noise, but nothing. When we started to agree to head home, we heard another step, but it was really close, and we both looked at each other and decided to go home. The footage I had was corrupted somehow, so I had no proof except my word. I plan on going back this weekend. I'm going to try to record.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.
Spring break 2009, me and about 6 other people decided to spend the weekend in Florida. We were going to leave Friday after class. Friday rolls around. Finals were pretty difficult, so I hadn't slept much. Our destination was only 7 or 8 hours away, so no big deal. My last class ended around 6:30 p.m. For whatever reason, 3 of the people weren't ready to go, as in hadn't packed at all, and so we didn't set out until around 10. There's a stretch of I-95 just before getting to Florida that is still pretty dark and pretty forested. At this point, I've been driving for about 2 or 2.5 hours and was awake for over 14. I'm tired. The road lines are blurring together, but the road is empty. I have a friend in the passenger seat and a big gulp full of Mountain Dew. I'm also young and hyped and think I can power through this. My friend riding with me is from a more urban area, and I told him that we might see a deer or two since they can come out on this road at night. A few minutes later, somewhere on this forested stretch of road, I see what I thought was a large black animal run right across the road in front of the car. Its body had 4 legs. Definitely wasn't a bear. It was more cat-like, I thought. I jolted awake and immediately asked my friend, "Did you see that?" He was a bit startled since I had jumped, but he just asked, "See what?" The black cat running across the road might have been a panther. He kind of shook his head and said he hadn't seen anything. I took a drink and said that we were going to have to switch places at the next stop. I was too tired and started to see things. I wasn't scared at the time. I knew I was running on fumes and just thought I was overtired. I had no idea this was an actual thing. But again, it was 12:30 or 1 a.m. I was falling asleep at the wheel, and sure enough, I saw a big black animal run across I-95, just beyond the glow of my lights.
You are listening to the content of ParanormalM.com.